Okay, hello everyone, Clark Towson here. I'm the CEO of INTJ Billing and the manager here of Spotswood Trailers. In this video today I want to talk a little bit about TRZ2 site compliance. Let's go through an item by item analysis, shall we? Every item placed on the Spotswood Trailers front yard here at 7 Cullen Court, Spotswood, has been deliberately chosen to reflect the intent and the legal scope of Transport Zone 2 under clause 36.02 of the Victorian Planning Scheme. Now, unlike traditional residential or commercial zoning, TRZ2 is designed to support transport systems, logistics operations and associated infrastructure. Now, as a result, the objects found on my site here are not just lawful, they're aligned with both the letter and the spirit of the TRZ2 zone. Let's go through item by item. Item number 1, trailers. Let's talk about justification for the trailers. Transport related use, that's what they are. They're directly aligned with TRZ2's intended function of supporting logistics and infrastructure. Let's talk a little bit about strategic commentary about that. Core operational use, right? That's what it is. It anchors the lawful activation under Section 6.3 of the Planning and Environment Act of 1987, Victoria. Camera pole with camera. There's my camera pole with the camera right there. This is permitted as ancillary infrastructure for monitoring and securing transport assets, such as the trailers. Cameras on poles are standard, of course, across Department of Transport yards. They support compliance, risk reduction, and deterrence of vandalism or theft. Chains and padlocks. Yeah, let's talk chains and padlocks. So, the chains are passive security infrastructure consistent with controlled access on government and private TRZ2 zone sites. Chains and padlocks are used extensively on leased TRZ2 land across Victoria to secure vehicles and gate access. Chain links between the bollards. As you can see, I've got chains between the bollards here. Okay, how are they appropriate, Clark? Talk to me. All right, here we go. The chains are used for visual and physical separation of vehicles and pedestrian space. They enhance safety without constituting development. Of course, chains are common across Department of Transport yards and Vic Roads compounds. They're aesthetically respectful and functionally sound. Stainless steel retractable bollards. Some people started giving me the nickname the Bollard King of Spotswood. I can understand that. I see the joke, I see the humour in it. So let's talk a bit about the bollards, right? Of course, bollards are physical infrastructure to prevent unauthorised access and protect vehicles or infrastructure on the site. Bollards are a standard fixture on TRZ2 zone land, particularly along arterial corridors and freeway interfaces. Remember, the bollards and the chains do not constitute a fence. They are not a fence. They're a traffic management device. Let's talk about wheel locks, because each trailer has got a wheel lock. Wheel locks, of course, are ancillary equipment used to secure trailers during storage or handover, which is consistent with transport security practice. Supports responsible trailer hire practices, avoids drift, theft, or injury. Let's talk a little bit about the curb ramps, because I've got quite a few curb ramps here. Why are the curb ramps appropriate, Clark? Well, they're temporary, they're removable infrastructure that facilitates safe trailer ingress and egress without altering the land. Without altering the land, I want you to think about that statement. I have not cut into the curb, okay? I have not altered the curb in any way, but the only thing that I've done to the curb is clean it, all right? Because it was very dirty before, because nobody had cleaned it in almost 50 years, right? So I gave it a wash with a pressure washer. I hope that was okay. Of course, curb ramps are non-permanent, they're comparable to curb ramps and mats used by contractors at TRZ2 work zones. So curb ramps are in use by the Department of Transport and other TRZ2 properties. Let's talk a little bit about the garden carts. You can see the garden carts in the background there. Of course, garden carts are on wheels. All right. Garden carts, manual handling aid for moving equipment or landscaping materials, operationally relevant and non-fixed. There's no planning implications of garden carts. They're the functional equivalent of equipment found on VicTrack and Department of Transport depots. How about the plants in the pots? Well, 48 different species of Australian native plants, very carefully selected and chosen by me to create a botanical garden-like atmosphere once in full bloom. And I'm very much looking forward to when they are in full bloom, which shouldn't be too much longer. Of course, plants in pots are decorative elements. That does not constitute a structure or development, and they're used to improve the visual appeal. Okay, I want visitors and my neighbours to be impressed at the garden that I've created behind here once it's in full bloom. Of course, flowers and plants soften site aesthetics. They reduce heat absorption and provide community interface value. See, I've got a wheelbarrow here. Wheelbarrow, of course, is a basic operational tool. No planning implications of that. Used for site setup, maintenance and landscaping. And they're ubiquitous. They're everywhere. Okay, not just on TRZ2 sites, but on residential sites as well. Let's talk a little bit about my signage, because you can see I've got this camera pole here and I've got the Spotswood Trailers sign up there. It's a small format A4 sign. It's been placed on the camera pole. It's lawful, it's non-permanent, it's aligned with standard practices on TRZ2 zoned land. Now, these signs, of course, serve practical purposes such as safety guidance, operational instructions and community interface, mirroring similar implementations on Department of Transport sites. A4 signage on a camera pole, that's what we're talking about here, right? So what's your planning justification for that, Clark? Well, ancillary site signage is not classified as development under the Planning and Environment Act. It's used for safety, wayfinding or contact information. Because it's got my branding up there, Spotswood Trailers, and my phone number, an address and the web address. It's consistent with signage found on TRZ2 land by the Department of Transport and Vic Roads. Signs, of course, convey important information. Spotswood Trailers branding, as I said. It's visually modest, it's removable, and it's in line with standard infrastructure messaging. It reinforces legitimacy and trustworthiness of the site. Let's talk a little bit about Clause 36.04 TRZ2 policy dissection. So I'm going to do. How does each item comply? All right. So I'm going to go through this Clause 36.04, the Victorian planning provisions, and I'm going to show how each item here lawfully complies, both in the spirit and the letter of the law as well. Right? So, zoning objective or clause 36.04 purpose is to provide for the use and development of land that complements or is consistent with the transport system. Relevant items on site: trailers, wheel locks, curb ramps. Of course, it directly helps comply because it supports transport logistics by enabling movement and storage of transport vehicles. These are not incidental, they're the core transport use of the site. Let's talk about Clause 36.04, 1, Section 1, any other use. Any other use is allowed if it's for a transport purpose and carried out by or on behalf of a transport manager. Operation is clearly for transport related purposes. trailer hire and short-term vehicle storage. No buildings have been erected. The use does not require a permit under section 1 because it meets this test. And given the, you might say to me, well, Clark, you're not a transport manager. So why are you allowed to do this? We've got you there. The council's going to get you. Department of Transport's going to get you with these. You're not a transport manager. Here's what I say to that. I am the closest thing to a transport manager that we have, okay? So that's number one. Now that's not a legal argument, right? This is a legal argument. The TRZ2 zoning of my mother's property is ultra vires. It was applied beyond the powers. And I've proven this, okay? I've got the legal proof. The Department of Transport has admitted that there's no consent document from the head of Transport Victoria for the TRZ2 zoning. And as such, there is no transport manager to permit what I'm doing or to carry it out. That's why I am the closest thing to a transport manager. Clause 36.04-2, permit required to construct a building or carry out works, but not for portable or removable items. As you can see, the site has curb ramps, garden carts, wheelbarrows and signage. The garden carts are on wheels. All these items are removable and they are non-permanent. No buildings or fixed structures have been constructed. This is consistent with clause exemptions. Clause 36.04-5 must consider the safe and efficient use of transport infrastructure. Oh, safe and efficient use. Let's talk about that. I've got a camera pole here. The camera, I've got chains, I've got padlocks, I've got bollards, I've got chains between the bollards, right? Now these features enhance the safety and operational control of a working transport yard. They mirror best practice at Vic Road sites and prevent misuse or injury. Clause 36.04-6, signage permitted with conditions, if not over a carriageway or above 600mm clearance. So, camera pole, I've got an A4 sign on it. It does not exceed 600mm height or span of carriageway. The sign's temporary, it's non-electric, and it serves safety and branding purposes. It is permitted without a planning permit. TRZ2 designation purpose, principal road network, clause 36.04-4. Let's talk about the overall yard configuration. My use case, trailers, bollards, chain links, curb ramps, garden carts. My use supports principal road activity by providing last mile transport services. The yard is directly adjacent to the Westgate Freeway, which is just over there, and it supports the interface with Melbourne's logistics corridors. So to summarise, every single item on the Spotswood Trailers yard is lawful, transport aligned and consistent with TRZ2 clause 36.04. The site does not contain buildings. It does not trigger signage prohibitions, and the site is legally protected under section 6.3 of the Planning and Environment Act of 1987 as an existing use. It's a textbook example of how private TRZ2 land can function lawfully. Alright, let's wrap this video up. Every item at 7 Cullen Court on this Spotswood Trailers yard is purposely selected, legally justified and functionally aligned with the intent of TRZ2. These aren't arbitrary choices, they're expressions of good governance, lawful activity and system-aware site design. What the public sees here behind me as a neat and tidy site is in fact a tightly coded expression of planning scheme compliance. The site isn't just compliant, it's a showcase of how private TRZ2 land can be lawfully activated for community benefit, economic purpose and transport oriented outcomes. All right.